Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's November 12th. Today, we celebrate the French admiral and explorer who had a female botanist posing as a male valet on his voyage. We'll learn about the botanist who's remembered by the state flower of California and the landscape architect who restored the entire landscape of colonial Williamsburg. We'll learn about the Spanish rose breeder who's remembered for cultivating the white Nevada rose. We'll hear some prose about November from 3 of the country's top naturalists. And we grow that garden library with a fabulous old book about growing your own herbal tea garden. I'll talk about potting up some paper whites and amaryllis. And then we'll wrap things up with the code breaker who also cracked the code on preserving England's garden history. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. Pink Villa shared a purely fun post that was called Cancer, Libra, Virgo. These zodiac signs love nature and find gardening therapeutic. When I shared it in the Facebook group, I said, finally, a horoscope I find myself wholeheartedly agreeing with, as a Cancer, of course. That said, to borrow a phrase from Ratatouille, everyone can garden. And then a newsletter out of Philadelphia shared a post from someone who had started composting, but then her compost bucket kept getting stolen. And the post was called, "Someone Keeps Stealing My Compost, and I Have No Idea Why They Want My Rotting Food." When Circle Compost in Philadelphia started picking up compost, their customers all received these little blue buckets that they were to set outside their front door on pickup day. Sadly, thieves who had no idea what was in the bucket were going around stealing the buckets. Hopefully, it won't take long for them to understand that the contents are only golden if you're a plant. Then Better Homes and Gardens recently shared a great post written by Laura Berry, and it was titled, "This is Australia's most popular indoor plant." Laura wrote, "It's the one plant to rule them all, and here it is, the Monstera deliciosa. That's the houseplant that appears in the most Australian homes." And you can read about it in Laura's post. And then finally, Laura Nightingale over at Get Surrey shared the mesmerizing sculptures that you can see at the Seville Garden. I said yes to all of them because the Seville Garden is hosting the 25th anniversary exhibition of the Surrey Sculptors. If you get a chance, you really should track down this post. Take a load off, scroll through the 60 pieces of art in this garden. It's a very inspiring post. The garden is beautiful. All of the pieces are so unique and so beautiful. So good job, artists. Good job, Seville Garden. Thank you for sharing that, Laura Nightingale. And if you get a chance to look at this post the next time you're in the Facebook group, just search for Seville, Savill, and this post will pop right up, and then you can scroll through all of the goodness. And it just might give you some ideas about art you can incorporate into your own garden. Now, if you'd like to check out these curated articles for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or track down links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community up in the search bar, and then the group will pop up and you can request to join. I'll approve you, and I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the anniversary of the death of the French admiral and explorer Louis Antoine de Bougainville, who died on this day in 1729. On Bougainville's expedition, a woman named Jean Beret joined the crew after posing as a valet to the expedition's naturalist, Philibert Commerson. Commerson had terrible health, and he likely needed Beret to help him. Beret herself was actually a botanist in her own right. When the ship stopped in Rio de Janeiro, it was Beret who ventured out into the tropics and returned with the lovely tropical vine that would be named in honor of the expedition's commander, Bougainville. And today is the birthday of Johann Friedrich von Escholz, who was born on this day in 1793. When the German poet Adalbert van Chamisso ended up in the San Francisco Bay Area, he wrote about the California poppy, which he named Escholzia californica, after his friend Johann Friedrich von Escholz. In return, Escholz named a bunch of plants after Chamisso. It was a little quid pro quo. In 1903, the botanist Sarah Plummer Lemon put forth a successful piece of legislation that nominated the golden poppy, Escholzia californica, as the state flower of California. And today is the anniversary of the death of the landscape architect Arthur Shercliffe, who died on this day in 1957. Shercliffe's path to landscape architecture was not clear-cut. His dad had been a successful businessman, and Arthur was supposed to follow in his dad's footsteps and become a mechanical engineer. But around the time Shercliffe was receiving his degree from MIT, the field of landscape architecture was making waves thanks to the Olmsteds, Charles Eliot, and the Chicago World's Fair. Since no formal degree programs existed at the time, Shercliffe cobbled together his own curriculum at the Lawrence School of Science at Harvard. All his life, Shercliffe loved being outside. He enjoyed camping and canoeing. He loved scenery and sketching the landscape. Looking back on his decision to pursue landscape architecture, Shercliffe remembered, "All led me away from mechanics toward scenery, toward planning and construction for the scenes of daily life." In 1904, Shercliffe opened his own firm. He designed recreational spaces in and around Boston, like the Rose Garden, the Washington Garden at Old North, and the Park Back Bay Ferns. But Shercliffe will forever be remembered for the work he did at Colonial Williamsburg. It was the first time an entire American community was to be restored. John D. Rockefeller financed the project, and Shercliffe had over 30 years of experience behind him when he officially started the project on St. Patrick's Day of that year. He didn't just bring his landscape architecture skills, he brought everything he had, his training in engineering, his meticulousness, and his ability to get things done through his personal clarity, energy, and charm. The project would use every bit of knowledge, skills, and expertise that Shercliffe had acquired. It wasn't just the buildings that needed restoration, it was the land, the paths, the streets, the gardens, and all the green spaces. It required tremendous research to restore it all. Shercliffe insisted that wherever possible, original items and authenticity was paramount. For example, Shercliffe's team actually went looking for fence post holes to ascertain the outlines of a backyard. This was true restoration in every sense of the word. It took Arthur Shercliffe 13 years to finish the project at Williamsburg. But once it was done, he had redefined Williamsburg, helping it to lay claim to its past and ensuring that colonial revival garden design found legitimacy in 20th century landscape architecture. And on this day in 1972, the Greenville News shared an article called Orchidist Finds Hobby Versatile. It caught my eye. The orchidologist was Gilbert L. Campbell. At the time the article was published, Campbell had been collecting orchids for 6 years, and he'd amassed a collection of more than 300 plants, in addition to a library of orchid reference materials. Campbell recalled, "My first orchid was a gift, and it led him to visit a commercial orchidologist in Newberry for more information." Orchid lovers grow orchids all year long, and Campbell's passion led him to add greenhouses to help with his hobby. He said, "Some orchidologists do grow their flowers in their homes, but I advise against it. Growing an orchid is like being a fisherman. Some fishermen may be content to sit on the bank and fish, but most want to get out in a boat on the lake. It's a lot easier to grow orchids in a greenhouse." He cites temperature and humidity control as one major benefit of growing tropical blooms under glass. As for why Campbell had 2 greenhouses, his answer was simple. He has the 2 because he needs a cool house for his cymbidium orchids and a medium house for his cattleyas. In orchideas, this means a temperature difference of 5 to 10 degrees. Campbell also advocates fresh air for the plants, which he moves outside in the summer and on balmy days throughout the winter. Orchids, like people, Campbell says, do best in a spring-like, fresh-feeling atmosphere. And Campbell believes that the 2 things which cause growers the most difficulty are proper watering and placement for the best performance. Campbell warned that when a plant ceases to function properly, it's vulnerable to insects and disease. So, to help combat these problems, he makes these recommendations. For the beginner, start with a few mature plants. Orchids like dry roots, so they should be watered thoroughly and then allowed to dry out. And today is the anniversary of the death of the Spanish rose breeder Pedro Dot, who died on this day in 1976. As a young boy, Pedro learned about plants from his father, who was a highly regarded gardener and plant breeder. The estate where his father worked grew roses, and the marquis of the estate funded Pedro's early work in hybridizing. Dot is remembered for his white rose, which came out in 1927. It was called Nevada and named for its color. Nevada is the Spanish word for snowy. And the British rosarian Peter Beals called Nevada one of the best-known semi-double shrub roses. And the American horticulturist and professor Dr. Griffith Buck, who taught horticulture at Iowa State University and created over 80 cultivars of rose, wanted to name one of his roses after Pedro Dot. So he reached out to Pedro's son. He said, "I wanted to name a rose after Pedro Dot, a famous Spanish rose breeder who supported me in my breeding. I wrote to Pedro's son, telling him that I'd like to name this rose for his father. I told him I knew his father was very proud of being a Spaniard, who was also proud of being a Catalonian." His son replied, "If you're going to name it for my father, why don't you name it in Catalonian and call it El Catala," which he did. And on this day in 1972, the Greenville News shared that the American Rose Society had chosen Pat Nixon to be their patroness. Here's what it said. Mrs. Richard Nixon recently accepted the invitation to become the first patroness of the American Rose Society on the invitation of Dr. Eldon W. Lyle, president of the group. She was presented with a brass gilded vase of 24 porcelain roses to commemorate the occasion. The garden party roses were created by Mrs. Oscar Tillot. In Unearthed Words, here are some thoughts on autumn from 3 of the country's naturalists. The first is from Hal Borland. 2 sounds of autumn are unmistakable. The hurrying rustle of crisp leaves blown along the street or road by a gusty wind, and the gabble of a flock of migrating geese. Both are warnings of chilly days ahead, fireside, and topcoat weather. And this one's from Aldo Leopold. The wind that makes music in November corn is in a hurry. The stalks hum, the loose husks whisk skyward in half-plane swirls, and the wind hurries on. A tree tries to argue, bare limbs waving, but there is no detaining the wind. And then finally, here's an excerpt from Autumn Within by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. It is autumn, not without, but within me is the cold. Youth and spring are all about. It is I that have grown old. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Herbal Tea Gardens by Marietta Marshall Marson. With Marietta's book, you can do something I've always wanted to do, create your own herbal tea garden. This inspiring guide covers everything you need to know to grow the right herbs and then to use them in homemade tea blends successfully. Providing plans for 22 themed tea gardens, Marson offers expert tips for growing and harvesting a variety of common herbs. And she offers clear directions for more than 100 recipes, including a flu brew and a double green digestive. Before you know it, you'll be creating enticing herbal teas to suit every occasion. And at the beginning of the book, Marietta shares the Chinese legend of the tea plant. I'll paraphrase some of it for you here. The white Buddha, known as Ta Mo, would sit in his garden near the palace and meditate through all the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The white Buddha would meditate unblinking and unsleeping. Finally, after many years, his attention wavered, his chin dropped, and his eyes closed in sleep. When the Buddha awakened, perhaps a day or a year later, he was so angry with himself for neglecting his meditation that he took out a knife, sliced off both of his eyelids, and threw them on the ground. The eyelids took root in the fertile soil, and they grew into a tea bush, the symbol for wakefulness. Ah, such a good legend. I love to find books like this for you, oldies but goodies that are also very affordable on the used book market. So you can get a used copy of Herbal Tea Gardens by Marietta Marson and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for under $2. Wow, great deal. Here's today's garden chore. Now is the perfect time to pot up some paper whites or amaryllis bulbs for forcing this winter. Paper whites and amaryllis make great gifts, and they add to your holiday decor. One of my favorite Christmas mantles over the fireplace featured a row of these large silver goblets that I'd found at Goodwill, and then I filled them with paper whites. And along the feet of the goblets, I strung Christmas lights, and then they were all sitting on top of the mantle, which I had covered in a sheet of moss. It was such a gardener's holiday mantle. So fun. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the anniversary of the death of Mavis Beatty, who died at the age of 92 on this day in 2013. It's hard to believe it's been 6 years already. Mavis Beatty is remembered for her work with the Enigma research team. She broke the German Enigma code, which allowed the Allied forces to stage their D-Day invasion. In 1955, Mavis and her husband settled on a farm in Surrey, and it was here that Mavis began learning about landscape history. After living in Surrey, she and her husband moved to Oxford, and they lived on a park that was designed by Capability Brown. The park was also home to a garden that was designed by William Mason in 1775. Mavis recalled, "We lived in the agent's house, right in the middle of Capability Brown's park. But it was William Mason's garden that really got me. We had to cut our way into it. It was all overgrown, and garden ornaments were buried in the grass. But I knew at once it wasn't just an ordinary derelict garden. Someone had tried to say something here." Well, that would not be the last garden that Mavis Beatty saved. In 1986, Mavis was honored with the Veitch Memorial Medal for her work preserving gardens that would otherwise have been lost to time. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.